last Sunday afternoon, I gave a lesson called True Greatness, and we talked about humility and how important humility is in the Christian's life. And we defined humility through a series of verses that kind of talk about humility and servanthood and the importance that they play in the Christian life. And we said that in doing that and being a humble servant, that's what makes us great as Christians. Not necessarily having great stature in our world that we live in, or being in charge of people, or having great wealth. These aren't things that make us great. Instead, we humble ourselves and we serve. And in Christ's kingdom, that makes us great. In Proverbs 16, 18 through 19, it says, "Their pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be humble in spirit with the needy than to divide the spoils with the proud." This proverb is illustrated well in several of Jesus' teaching, but specifically it's illustrated well in the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and teaches us a great lesson. A contrast is being made in this proverb of the pride going to destruction and a haughty spirit towards stumbling, and that it's better to be humble in spirit with the needy than to divide spoils with the proud. There's a contrast here between the humble and the proud. And that's the same thing that's happening in the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. It's a heart that's focused on glorifying ourselves. That's what the Pharisee has. We'll see that here. Luke 18, 9 through 14. "He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, 'God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I get.' But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast, saying, 'God, be merciful to me, a sinner.' Then Jesus says, 'I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted.'" That last phrase specifically is strikingly similar to the proverb that we read, contrasting the proud and the humble. You know, comparisons, biblically speaking, are never something that's encouraged. We're not meant to compare ourselves to each other. We're not meant to look at each other and say, "Well, they have this, I need that also. I need to work so I can be in this same position as this person in this life." Or looking down on someone. We might pass people who are homeless on the street and say, "You know what? I'm sure glad I'm not like that guy." In that situation, we're a lot like this Pharisee, aren't we? I thank you, God, that I'm not like this homeless man. Maybe you think to yourself, "I'm glad that I've made better decisions in my life than this homeless man, and that the decisions I've made have led me to drive this nice car, or to have this house, or to be in this better financial situation than this man." It's an unfavorable comparison, isn't it? Comparing ourselves to others, especially those who are less fortunate than us. And oftentimes, whenever we look at this parable. I'm mixing those two together. When we look at this parable, we think of ourselves as the tax collector. We say, I'm humble. I realize that I'm a sinner. I realize that I'm in need. But often, we don't think of ourselves as possibly being the Pharisee. We don't want to think of ourselves being the Pharisee. But we can do it. We can look down on others. And we become prideful. I've done it. I'm sure you can think back and look at times when you've looked at someone less fortunate and say, I'm thankful I didn't make those decisions. Didn't end up like them. But whenever we make comparisons with each other, it can lead to several different issues. It can lead to pride, yes, but it can also lead to jealousy if we're looking at someone who we look at as more blessed in this life. It doesn't matter which way you look, someone who's, greater than you, or someone that you look at as less than you. Either way, it can lead us into sinful thoughts. So comparisons are not a good thing for us to have, comparing ourselves to others. Proverbs 16:5 says, "Everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Assuredly, he will not be unpunished." Now, I want to remind you a little bit of what we talked about last week. We talked about the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. We have a series going on the Beatitudes right now on our YouTube channel. But Matthew 5, 3 through 10. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." When we look at each one of these 8 Beatitudes, each one of these Beatitudes either speak directly to humbleness, especially in the case of the poor in spirit and things like that. They speak directly to having a humble spirit, or they speak of things that outflow from being a humble person. And this is one of the most important sermons, if not the most important sermon, definitely the most important that we have recorded by Jesus. The longest continuous sermon that he preached in our Bible. And he chose to start off his ministry with this great sermon and start off with a lesson on humility. Because humility, as we talked about last week, is foundational. Everything that we want to grow in our Christian life comes from having a humble spirit. Remind you what Augustine said. He said, "If you ask me concerning the precepts of the Christian religion, I will answer first, second, and third, humility." So we posed a question last week. Why does he say first, second, almost gave it away. Why does he say first, second, third, humility? Why does he layer it? Why doesn't he just say, well, the most important thing is humility, and then it's your faith, and then it's this, and then it's this, or whatever order he may put it in? He says it's first, second, third, humility. And we talked about the reason that is because everything that we want to grow and to flourish in the Christian life grows out of the soil of humility. So we talked about our faith and how with faith, no one would depend on Christ as someone who is weak and in need of salvation if they didn't have humility. We talked about worship and how if someone didn't have humility, they wouldn't seek to make great of someone else. in this case God, and offer praise and worship to Him if they didn't have humility. We talked about obedience, where if someone didn't have humility, they wouldn't give up their free will and submit wholly. Of course, we always have free will, but they wouldn't submit wholly to another entity if they weren't humble. And we talked about love and how with love we're making much of someone else. We are doing it at cost to ourselves because we love them and we're seeking to make great of them at cost to ourselves. And so someone wouldn't do that unless they were a humble person. And so everything that we want to flourish in the Christian life stems from or grows out of this soil that we call humility. And so whenever this soil begins to get ruined, if it starts to lose its minerals, I don't know how to grow things. You have to forgive me. But I know soil can eventually lose its goodness, you could say. And things don't grow as well in it. And so you have to tend to it and fertilize it and keep it good. Anyways. It's the same with our humility. If our humility goes unchecked and we let pride creep into our life, whenever the soil of humility begins to get tainted, our faith suffers, our worship suffers, our obedience suffers, our love for one another suffers, because we're looking out for numero uno. So it's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, however high you want to count, everything grows out of this soil. And everything good that we want to grow, to flourish in our Christian life, needs humility. And when the soil is ruined, these things wither. I want to spend the rest of our time doing kind of a study of Luke 22. This passage, like the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, we see a contrast that happens here. This is Jesus' last night with His disciples in Luke 22. He's eating the Last Supper with them, and there arose a dispute among His disciples. And there also arose, this is Luke 22, 24 through 34. And there arose also a dispute among them as to which one of them was regarded to be greatest. And He said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it's not this way with you. But the one who is greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just like my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. But he said to him, Lord, with you I am ready to go to both prison and to death. And he said, I say to you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you have denied 3 times that you know me. You know, this teaching by Jesus is very simple. It's very basic. And this is what congregations need. Many times, as people who are presenting messages to a congregation, we think about, we want to preach something new, something maybe that we hadn't thought of before. And we get excited about this and we're ready to present it. But oftentimes that's not the type of thing that the congregations need. Sometimes we need to get back to the basics, such as humility. Some people might say teaching on things like humility and love is weak teaching. But it's not. It's what we need. The basic things are the main things, and those are the things that we need before we move on to the harder things. We need milk before we can eat meat. Sometimes we want to jump straight to the meat, and oftentimes from the pulpit, what we hear taught is not milk, it's meat. And whenever we teach the meat, and half of the congregation are babes in Christ, we're not really helping them with their needs. But whenever we provide milk, everyone is satisfied. And I'm not saying it's wrong to present meat from the pulpit, but let's make sure that we are equally, if not more, focused on presenting milk. Because these are the things that are important in the Christian life. These are things that everything else is going to grow from. It's going to make us love and cherish God and want to obey Him. Everything else falls in line. We don't need a commitment to the deeper truths. We need a deeper commitment to the simple truths. And when we commit to those simple truths, the deeper truths will come with it. We got to get down the basics. We got to learn how to properly throw a ball before we get on a pitcher's mound and throw a pitch. So we need a deep commitment to these things, the simple things in our life. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Lord's Supper. And Jesus has just told the apostles that someone in their midst is going to betray them. Verse 21 through 23, this is just prior to what we just read. But behold, the hand of the one betraying me is with mine on the table. For indeed, I bet everyone was like, putting their hands up. My hand's not on the table. For indeed the Son of Man is going as it has been determined. But woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who is going to do this thing. We know, of course, who the betrayer was. We know that later this night, Judas would betray Jesus. He would turn him in and he would sell him for 30 pieces of silver. What I'm interested in now is what happened right after this. Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. The next thing we come across is the apostles or the disciples are in an argument. Which one of us is greatest? That seems a little strange, and I can only imagine that the conversation transitioning into this is, well, which one of us is the least? Which one of us would do such a thing like betray Jesus? Let's figure out who the least of us is. And then they get in a discussion of, well, we figured out that one of us is going to betray Jesus and one of us is lesser than the rest of us. But which one of us is the greatest? So this discussion arose. And this is not the first time that this discussion has arose. Remember not Peter and John, but James and John, the sons of thunder. Their mother was trying to figure out who's going to sit on Jesus' left and right hand. They're fighting about who's going to be the greatest. And this is the last night that they have with their Lord and Savior. Their last moments to spend with Jesus. They're sitting in front of the greatest person ever walked this earth, and they're worried about which one of them is the greatest. Jesus' response, both here and whenever Peter and John were trying to figure out who's going to sit at the left and right hand, is basically the same. Here Jesus stops them in verse 25. The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it is not this way with you. But the one who is greatest among you must become the youngest, and the leader like the servant. Who's the most important person in this room? It's not me. I know I'm standing up here, but I'm definitely not the most important person in this room. What makes you or anyone more significant than anyone else? What makes you more significant than a homeless person? What makes you more significant than someone who is in prison? I hate to burst your bubble, but your soul is no more valuable than theirs. And you know what? Whenever one of them is saved, when a homeless person is saved, whenever a sinner is saved, there's more rejoicing in heaven over them, the ones that are lost, than the ones who are in the fold. You are not more valuable than anyone in this world. Your soul did not come at any greater cost to Jesus than any other soul walking this earth. We have all sinned. No sin is greater than anyone else's. We have all sinned and we have all fallen short. No matter what we've done, no matter what they've done, our souls are the same. And they're of the same value. Jesus kind of blows their whole conversation that they're having here out of the water. He says, you're arguing about things that people in the world are arguing about. You know those Gentiles over there? You know those Romans over there who are gauging their wealth based on how much money they have and how many people they lord over and how many servants they have and how big their house is? You sound like those people when you're having these discussions. And he says those people think that they're benefactors. They call themselves benefactors. Benefactors just means doers of good. Jesus makes a very simple phrase here. Very simple. It's not that way with you. It's not that way with us. We aren't to be comparing ourselves to others. We aren't supposed to be thinking that we're greater than anyone in any aspect of our life. There was a TV show a long time ago called Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous. And they would get these cameras. If you know this show, you're older than me. They would get these cameras and they would walk through the house of all these mega rich people. And the mega rich people would say, oh, this is my butler. This is my indoor pool. This is my bar. They would show them around the house. This is my lady. All she does is clean windows. That's all she does. That's her only job. And this guy only shines my shoes. That's his only job in life, is he shines my shoes. But anyways, and then later there was another show, I think they called it MTV Cribs, where you had celebrities kind of do the same thing, and their fridges were always meticulous, all these drinks, and they always had Crystal Light in there or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, the point is these people are showing off all their wealth, all these great things that they had, and things that they had accumulated through their success. And people would watch it. And they would watch it and say, you know what? I wish I had a meticulous fridge like that had all the drinks in order, and I had unlimited Crystal Light, and I had a water fountain that had Kool-Aid coming out of it. And they wanted this stuff. I wanted that stuff. I was like, man, that would be neat. That's the life I want to live. That's what we want. That's what we strive for. We compare ourselves and we say, my life is trash because I don't have a Kool-Aid water fountain. Jesus says, it's not that way with you. The whole world looks up to these people and says, if you're not like that, if you haven't accumulated great wealth, if you don't have people that you lord over, you are nothing. Your voice doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you say. You're a peasant. No one's going to listen to you. And it seems like today, what a lot of people are striving for, almost more than wealth, is they are striving for like a celebrity status. And so we have all these social media sites and YouTube and TikTok and all these sites. And a lot of kids in school now want to be YouTubers. That's what they want to do for a living. They want to make YouTube videos and they want to blog about their life and show how great their life is and walk around with a camera like this. And I couldn't do that. But that's what they want to do for a living. It's all about them. Making their life look great. And I can tell you a lot of these YouTubers, their life is not as great as they make it look. Their life is full of heartache and sadness and all sorts of stuff just like ours. Older people might say they put their pants on the same as we do, one leg at a time. But we compare ourselves. We want those things. It's created this whole society of telling people exactly what's going on in our life and for the purpose of getting likes and recognition on social media. It's not that way with you. It's not that way with us. This is their last night with Jesus. They're fighting over who's the greatest. What's Jesus doing this very night? He's washing their feet. Earlier this night, Jesus had washed their feet, and they're still worried about who's the greatest. The King of the universe got down on his knees and made himself a servant and washed their feet. I don't like touching my own feet. And in this time, they didn't have New Balance, they didn't have Nike, they didn't have socks and things of that nature. The dirt that they were walking through, the mud that they were walking through, stayed on their feet all day. There's nothing wrong with owning a company and having people who work under you. There's nothing wrong with having a great amount of wealth. It makes it tougher for you as a Christian, Jesus says. It can create stumbling blocks for you when you have a great wealth. With great wealth comes great responsibility and an understanding that this money that I've accumulated means nothing whenever I pass on from this life. And if God has blessed you in that way, great. But where God blesses us, whether with money, with talents, abilities, whatever blessing God gives you, it's not meant to glorify you. It's meant to glorify God. And you use those blessings for the kingdom. That's the reason God gave it to you. Galatians 5:13 says, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge in the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. Don't take the blessings God gave you to indulge in the flesh, but rather serve others. Find a way to take that blessing, that talent, that ability, and use it for the kingdom. And if you are serving humbly in love, there's going to be no room for pride. If that's your focus, if your focus is on serving others, there's no time to think about exalting yourself or putting yourself in some light that glorifies you, because you're worried about others. Jesus then says, I meant for you guys to read that, so read it real quick. It's going down in just a few seconds. Okay, moving on. All right, verse 27. I sometimes forget that I put animations. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. So here Jesus asks a rhetorical question. He says, who is greater, the one who is sitting at the table or the one who is serving the ones sitting at the table? We'd probably say, duh, it's the person sitting at the table. But he says, look at me. Jesus says, look at what I'm doing. Look at what I've done this very night. I'm serving you. So with your logic, who is greater? Is it still you who's sitting at the table? Here Jesus is the head of the table, the ruler of the universe, serving. If you let that sink in, Jesus says, if I am truly your example, if you call yourself a Christian, and I hope you do, a Christian is a follower of Christ. You're trying to emulate Christ in your life. So what should you do? You should serve one another. These are basic truths. We get these things down. We get down these basic truths. Everything will flourish. Everything will grow. When someone walks with you, when someone talks with you, when someone spends time with you, you should literally be the closest thing they have to spending time with Christ, because you are trying to emulate Christ. They should be able to say, you know what? I see Christ in that person. Whenever I spend time with them, it's almost like I'm with Christ, because they are always focused on serving other people, and they're always focused on the things that Christ would want them to do. People should be able to say that about us. But instead, our natural reaction is, I'm going to blend in with society. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to draw attention to myself. So I'm just going to blend in with this crowd, and we're all going to move together. But at the end, I'm going to just pop out, and I'm going to go to heaven, and they're going to go where they're going. It's not that way with us. We're called to be different. We're called to stand out. So that's our goal in life. Moving on. Luke 22, 28 through 30. You are those who have stood by me in my trials. And just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Those who follow Jesus and believe that he died on the cross for our sin, and we make that commitment through baptism that in return we are going to serve him with our life. Jesus says, you are in that kingdom. You are part of that kingdom. Not only are you in the kingdom, but 1 Corinthians 6 says that you are going to sit in judgment over angels. You are going to be judging the 12 tribes here. When he talks about judging the 12 tribes, he's not talking about on that final day judging the 12 tribes. But we, as Christians, are currently judging the 12 tribes. We are showing their error. We are showing those we encounter in our life the error in their life. So it's not a judgment to where we say, you go here, you go here, you go here. But it's instead showing people the error in their life. And based on those errors and how they respond to those errors, in ignoring those corrections or repenting of their sins, will depend on where they finally go. So Jesus is essentially telling the disciples here, your job as apostles is going to be to convict the world. Whenever I go, you are going to be doing the types of things that I'm doing now. And if you don't get down this humility thing, if you are walking around with pride, you are not going to be able to serve the kingdom the way that I want you to do. I want you to. You are going to be judging the 12 tribes, he tells them. You are going to be out there convicting the world of their sin. So, this is how it works in Jesus' kingdom. If you're going to rule, you have to serve as Jesus did. So we have to ask, if our duty as Christians is to convict the world, people have to know who we are. People have to know that we're Christians. So do your neighbors know you're a Christian? Do those who work with you know you're a Christian? Have you ever brought up the Bible to them? Moving on to the most important part of this message. Well, it's not the most important part, but it is key to what we're talking about. In verse 31. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. To sift like wheat just means tear you apart. Satan has asked permission to tear Peter apart. He wants to chew him up and spit him out. I want you to think about that. Jesus says, hey, Simon, I just want you to know Satan's coming after you. He wants you. In fact, he has asked for you specifically. We may think of Job when Satan asked God, hey, I really want to tempt Job and see if he's able to withstand this temptation. And God said, go ahead. Go ahead and try that. He wants to grab hold of Peter and thrash him about and see if Peter's faith survives. God says, go ahead. But guess what? Jesus says, I've prayed for you. Now, that may be an interesting response to us. And we'll get to that in just a second. I want to read this verse. No temptation. So even though Satan wants to tear Peter apart, there's no guarantee that he'll be able to, because God will not allow Peter to be tempted beyond what he is able to endure. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide a way of escape also, so that you may be able to endure it. So God will allow us to be tempted, and we will be tempted. God is not the one who tempts us. Satan is the one who tempts us. But God will not allow Satan to tempt us beyond what we're able to endure. So whatever temptation, whatever trial you come across, you know, and sometimes this happens and we're like, I don't think I can get through this. I don't know if I can withstand this. Here's a promise that you can. Whatever temptation, whatever trial you come across, you have the ability to endure it, and God has provided a way of escape for you. James said in James 1, "Blessed is the man." Chuck knows this verse. He taught it to us recently. "Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, he will receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am being tempted by God,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone." So Jesus tells Peter, Satan is after you. He's coming for you. He's coming to tempt you. He wants to test your faith. And that's a weird thought. As we're giving this example, there could be people in this room who are going through temptations right now. In fact, I guarantee you there are people in this room that are going through temptations right now. Satan is after you. He would love to see you mess up this week. He would love for you to walk out of the store, forget everything that's said, and go live a life of pride this week. He wants you to be arrogant. He wants you to think, whatever trial or temptation that comes my way, I can handle it. I don't need help from anyone. This is their last night with Christ. They're focused on what the world argues about. They're focused on themselves. And Satan wants you on your deathbed wondering at the end of your life, where am I going? Where am I going to spend eternity? That's what he wants. He wants you to fall. He wants you to ditch your faith. Satan would love for you to commit a crime this week. Or, if you didn't read your Bible this week, he would love for you to not crack open that book this week. He would love for you to not pray to God this week. He would love for you to not sing praises to God this week. Satan oftentimes is not trying to get us to do something. He's trying to get us to do nothing. If we do nothing, he accomplishes his purpose. Listen to what Jesus had to say here. "But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And you, when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Whenever I read this, it hits me. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus is the one who endured 40 days of fasting, enduring these very same trials and temptations from Satan. Whenever he was at his weakest point physically, when he was hungry and he was thirsty. And here he tells Peter, I prayed for you. Prayed for you. I would expect something different. If I was sitting at that table, knowing what Jesus had been through, and I've just been told Satan's after you, I would expect Jesus to say, okay, here's the game plan. Satan's after you. What we need to do is we need to do A, B, C, and D. This is exactly what I did when I was enduring temptation in the desert. It worked for me. It'll work for you. All right, break. That's what I would expect. That's not what he does. Sometimes the best thing in life is not to give our advice, is not to tell people what they should do, but to pray for them. Whenever we are giving our advice, we are giving advice from our worldly wisdom. unless we're giving biblical advice. But sometimes we just got to pray. Sometimes we just have to forget about calling our friend and asking for advice, and we just have to pray to God because He's the one in a better position than your friend to deliver you from that situation anyway. He's the one who's able to deliver you from the pit. And it's a proud man who says, I don't need prayers and I can handle this on my own. It's a proud man who doesn't ask for prayers whenever he is enduring trials and temptation. And he says, I got this. Do we believe in prayer like Jesus did? Jesus was the best thing he could do in this situation was pray. This should motivate us to focus on prayer. This week, today, focus on prayer. Focus on whatever trials or temptations you may endure, or what your brothers and sisters are enduring. Focus on praying for them, for yourself, because that's what Jesus would do. That's what he does here for Peter. That's what he did whenever he was in Gethsemane before he went to the cross. He went to Jesus or God to pray. He wasn't asking his disciples for advice on what to do in the situation. He went and prayed alone. He took 3 with him, but they were kind of out of it. He prayed. He believed in the power of prayer. And that's why Ephesians 6, we're given all these spiritual weapons of defense because we're under spiritual attack. And whenever we are going to our brothers and sisters or we're going to our friends, I'm not saying not to do that at all, but pray first. Whenever we go to them, before we go to God, we are trying to fight a ghost with a bullet. We're trying to fight our spiritual battles with wisdom from a buddy. We see that Jesus' response is something that we need to emulate in our life because he believed in the power of prayer. And I don't want you to take this information and say, well, Stuart says that all we need to do is pray and we don't need to go to therapy, we don't need to go to counseling, we don't need to do that. That's not what I'm saying. Go to counseling. Go to therapy. Do whatever you have to do because mental illness is a serious thing. But maybe the first thing we should do before we call our buddy is pray. And don't forget to pray. Don't just go to counseling and not pray. Like, I got this handled because I'm going to counseling or I'm going to therapy. I don't need to pray. Remember prayer as you go throughout your life. Remember and understand the power of prayer as Jesus did. Now, Peter's response, we're almost done. But he said to him, Lord, with you I am ready to go to prison and to death. Now, on the surface, we see this and we say, that's great. That is a great response, Peter. That's great of you to say, I'm ready to go to prison and to death. Right on. But you know what Peter's saying here? Jesus said, I'm going to pray for you. And he says, nah, I got this. I'm ready to go. I don't need your prayers. I'm ready to go to prison and to death for you already. Satan's not going to get me. It's pride. His pride is showing. That's why Jesus' response in verse 34, he says, stop it, Peter. He says, I say to you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you have denied 3 times that you know me. He says, you say you're ready to go to prison and to death, but this very night you are going to deny me 3 times. You need my prayers. This is why I pray for you. Because you have pride in your life and you are not going to ask for prayers, you are not going to accept prayers because you think you can handle it by yourself. Jesus says, you're so close to denying me. And he says, you're going to deny me, and that's why I pray for you. So, don't get so arrogant in your life to not ask for prayers from people, to not ask for people to pray for you, to not go to God in prayer immediately as soon as you have a problem. Pray throughout the day. Whenever you're about to go have a conversation with someone, after you've had a conversation with someone, pray. If you're having a tough time at work, if you have anxiety about work, pray. And don't ever look at me and say, Stuart's an evangelist, so he doesn't need prayers, because I probably need more prayers than anyone in this room. No soul is greater than anyone else. No one in here doesn't need prayers. We all need prayers. We all have trials and temptations. Satan is after every single one of us. And all of us, like Peter, are this close to blowing it. We can easily blow it if we go through our life with arrogance and with pride. And that's why they say pride leads you to destruction.